My twin sister lost $250,000 to phone scammers. We switched places and set up a surprise for them that sent them behind bars. I'm glad you're here with me. Please listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I never thought my Tuesday morning coffee ritual would be interrupted by a phone call that would change everything. At 68, I'd settled into a comfortable retirement in my modest house in Portland, Oregon. My twin sister Elizabeth, we called each other Maggie and Betty, lived just 20 minutes away. We'd always been close, finishing each other's sentences, sharing that inexplicable twin connection people always found fascinating. That morning started like any other. I was reviewing my monthly budget spreadsheet. Old habits from my 40 years as a corporate accountant never really die, when my phone rang. Betty's number flashed on the screen. Maggie. Her voice cracked immediately. That was my first warning sign. Betty never cracked. She was the tougher one, the one who'd raised 3 kids mostly alone after her husband passed, the one who never complained. What's wrong? I asked, already standing up from my kitchen table. I need you to come over, now, please. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in her living room, watching my identical twin sister, my mirror image, fall apart in front of me. Her hands shook as she tried to explain what had happened over the past 3 months. It started with a call from Microsoft Security, she began, her voice hollow. They said my computer had been hacked, that my bank accounts were compromised. They sounded so professional, Maggie, so convincing. My stomach dropped. Betty? No. They transferred me between departments. I spoke to federal agents, bank security officers, even someone claiming to be from the Treasury Department. She laughed bitterly. They knew my full name, my address, even which bank I used. How could I not believe them? How much? I asked quietly. She couldn't look at me. $250,000. The number hung in the air between us like a physical weight. That was Betty's entire retirement savings. Everything she'd scraped together from her late husband's life insurance, her own modest pension, the sale of their old house, her safety net, her future. They said if I didn't move the money to secure federal accounts, I'd lose everything to the hackers, she continued, tears now streaming down her face. They had me buy gift cards, wire transfers, even Bitcoin. They called me every single day, sometimes multiple times. They said I was under federal investigation, that I couldn't tell anyone or I'd be arrested for obstruction of justice. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and sharp. Have you called the police? Yesterday. They took a report, but they said... She wiped her eyes. They said these scammers are usually overseas. The money's probably gone forever. They said I'm not the first, won't be the last. They were sympathetic but basically told me not to get my hopes up. I moved to sit beside her, taking her trembling hands in mine. We'd been through everything together. Childhood, marriages, raising families, losing our husbands. But I'd never seen her this broken. There's something else, Betty whispered. They called again this morning. What? They said there's one more transfer needed to close the federal case. $15,000. They're coming to my house on Friday to help me complete the final transaction in person. They said it's the only way to get my money back from the federal holding account. A chill ran down my spine. Betty, they're not coming to help you. They're coming to take whatever you have left. I know that now, she said miserably. But Maggie, I have nothing left to give them anyway. My accounts are empty. I already took out a loan against the house for the last payment they demanded. I stared at my sister, at this woman who looked exactly like me. And an idea began forming in my mind. A dangerous idea. A crazy idea. Betty, I said slowly. When they call, they've never seen your face, right? They only know your voice? They've done video calls, she said, but yes, they've only seen me. I squeezed her hands tighter. What if the person they saw on Friday wasn't you? She looked up at me, confused, then understanding dawned in her eyes identical to my own. Maggie, what are you thinking? I'm thinking, I said, feeling that old accountant's brain start calculating possibilities, risks, and potential outcomes. That these bastards are about to learn what happens when they mess with the wrong grandmother. Betty and I spent the rest of that Tuesday afternoon at her dining room table, reconstructing the nightmare piece by piece. I'd brought my laptop, a legal pad, and the methodical mindset that had served me through decades of corporate audits. Start from the beginning, I said, pen poised. Every call, every transfer, every detail you can remember. It took hours. Betty had kept some records, thank God, screenshots of some transactions, phone numbers, even recordings of a few voicemails the scammers had left. As we compiled the timeline, a picture emerged of sophisticated, calculated predation. The scammers had been brilliant in their approach. They'd isolated Betty, convinced her that contacting family or friends would jeopardize the federal investigation. They'd called at the same times each day, creating a routine, a relationship almost. They'd alternated between kind reassurance and veiled threats, keeping her off balance and compliant. March 15th, Betty said, checking her bank statement. First wire transfer, $20,000 to an account they said was Federal Reserve holding. I wrote it down. And they called you how many times before that? At least a dozen. They were very patient, very thorough in explaining the process. Her voice dripped with self-recrimination. Stop that, I said firmly. This isn't your fault. These are professionals. This is what they do. But inside, my own fear was growing. Could I really do this? Confront criminals who'd proven themselves expert manipulators? I was a retired accountant, not a detective or some action hero. My most exciting life event in the past 5 years had been winning the church bake sale competition. Yet looking at Betty's hollowed-out expression, I felt something harder than fear settle in my chest. Determination. These people had taken my sister's security, her peace of mind, her future. They'd preyed on a widow, a grandmother, someone who'd worked her entire life for that money. No, that wouldn't stand. Tell me about Friday, I said. What exactly did they say? Betty pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. They called yesterday. A man named Agent Morrison said that due to the complexity of my case, they needed to complete the final transfer in person. He said they'd send someone to the house at 2 p.m. on Friday to facilitate the secure transaction and release my funds from federal holding. And you're supposed to have $15,000 in cash? Yes, he was very specific. Cash only, no checks or cards? Betty's hands trembled as she held her phone. Maggie, I don't even have $1,500 left, let alone $15,000. Good, I said. Because you're not going to be there on Friday. I am. But what's the point if there's no money to give them? They'll just leave. I smiled then, feeling the first spark of my plan crystallizing. Betty, we worked in corporate finance for decades. What's the first rule of catching fraud? She thought for a moment, then understanding flickered across her face. Document everything. Exactly. These people have been operating in shadows, over phone lines, through untraceable accounts. But on Friday, they're walking into the light. They're coming to a physical address in person to commit a federal crime. I opened my laptop and started searching. We need to make this count. We need evidence that will hold up, that the police can actually use. The police already said they can't do anything, Betty protested, because right now all they have is your statement about phone calls and electronic transfers. But if we can catch these people in the act of attempting extortion, attempting to collect money through fraud, with video evidence, with witnesses. I looked up at her. That changes everything. Betty was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What do you need me to do?" Over the next hour, we formulated the basics of a plan. I would switch places with Betty. Easy enough since we'd been fooling people with our identical appearances our entire lives. I'd set up cameras around Betty's house, hidden but comprehensive. I'd wear a wire if I could figure out how to get one. And most importantly, I'd document everything these criminals said and did. "We need help," Betty finally said. "We can't do this completely alone." She was right. As much as I wanted to handle this myself, we needed backup, needed someone who knew what they were doing legally. "I'll call Detective Rodriguez," Betty said, referring to the officer who'd taken her initial report. "Maybe if we bring him evidence instead of asking for help, he'll listen." "Tomorrow," I agreed. "First thing tomorrow morning." That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Friday afternoon, imagined opening Betty's door to these criminals. What would they look like? Would they be threatening? Violent? Was I really brave enough to face them? But then I remembered Betty's broken expression, her empty bank accounts, her stolen future. I had to be brave enough. I didn't have a choice. Wednesday morning, Betty and I sat in Detective Marcus Rodriguez's small office at the Portland Police Department's Fraud Division. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen too many cases like Betty's. "Mrs. Chen," he said, addressing Betty with professional courtesy, "I appreciate you coming in, but as I explained yesterday, these international scam operations—" "Detective," I interrupted, "what if they weren't international on Friday? What if they were right here in Portland, at my sister's house, attempting to collect $15,000 through fraudulent means?" His eyes sharpened. "Explain." We laid it out for him. The phone call demanding an in-person meeting. Betty's plan to let me take her place. The opportunity to catch these criminals in the act with video evidence. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying us both. "This is dangerous. These aren't petty criminals. They've stolen $250,000. They could be violent." "Which is exactly why we're here," I said firmly. "We need this to be done properly, with police backup nearby. But Detective, with respect, this might be the only chance to catch them." He was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out a notepad. "Tell me everything about Friday's arrangement." We spent an hour going through details. Rodriguez made calls, consulted with colleagues. Finally, he turned back to us. "Here's what I can do. I'll have plainclothes officers in an unmarked car down the street. You'll wear a wire. We'll set that up Friday morning. The moment these people attempt to collect money or make threats, we move in." He fixed me with a serious look. "But Mrs. Sullivan, at the first sign of danger, you get out. Your safety is not negotiable." "Agreed," I said, though my hands were shaking under the table. "There's something else," Betty said hesitantly. "They've been calling every day to check in. What if they call before Friday and realize something's wrong?" Rodriguez considered this. "Do they usually video call or voice only?" "Mostly voice, sometimes video," Betty answered. "Then nothing changes before Friday," he said. "Mrs. Chen, you keep answering their calls. Keep acting compliant. Don't give them any reason to suspect you're on to them." That evening, as if on cue, Betty's phone rang. The caller ID showed Federal Security Division, obviously spoofed. Betty put it on speaker, her hand hovering over the answer button. I nodded encouragingly. "Hello?" Betty's voice wavered only slightly. "Mrs. Chen, this is Agent Morrison." The man's voice was smooth, authoritative, with just a hint of warmth. "I'm calling to confirm our appointment for Friday at 2 p.m. "Yes, I'll be here," Betty said. "Excellent. Now you have the $15,000 in cash as we discussed?" Betty glanced at me. "I've been gathering it. It's been difficult. Mrs. Chen. The warmth vanished from his voice instantly. We've been very patient with you, very understanding, but this final step is critical. If you don't have the funds Friday, the federal government will seize all your assets. Do you understand? I felt rage pulse through me at his threatening tone, but I kept silent. I understand, Betty whispered. I'll have it. Good. Remember, tell no one about this meeting. Federal investigations require complete confidentiality. If we discover you've discussed this with anyone, the consequences will be severe. After she hung up, Betty looked at me with wide eyes. Did you hear how he changed? How quickly he went from friendly to threatening? I heard. I'd also been recording the call on my phone. And now we have evidence of the threat, the demand for cash, all of it. Over the next 2 days, the scammers called 3 more times. Each call followed the same pattern, friendly check-ins that turned menacing the moment Betty showed any hesitation. Each call, I recorded. On Thursday evening, my phone rang. An unknown number. Hello? Betty Chen? A different voice this time, younger. Yes? I answered without thinking. This is David from Federal Security. We need to confirm your address for tomorrow's appointment. My blood ran cold. They'd called my number. How did they have my number? This is her sister Margaret, I said carefully. Betty's phone died. She asked me to take a message. There was a pause, a long, assessing pause. Her sister. The voice was flat now, suspicious. Betty never mentioned having a sister. We're twins, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Is there a message? Another pause. Tell Betty we'll see her tomorrow, 2 p.m. sharp. And Mrs. Sullivan? My name in his mouth made my skin crawl. Make sure Betty is the only one home tomorrow. We'd hate for any complications. The line went dead. I sat there, phone in my shaking hand, staring at Betty, who'd gone pale. They know about you, she whispered. Maggie, they researched us. They know we're twins. Or they're just being thorough, I said. But my voice lacked conviction. That night, I lay awake thinking about that voice, that threat. These people had done their homework. They knew more about us than we'd realized. Tomorrow wasn't just about catching criminals anymore. Tomorrow had just become genuinely dangerous. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable rain. I stood in Betty's bathroom, staring at my reflection, which was, of course, identical to hers. We'd dressed in the same style she'd worn during her video calls with the scammers. A light blue cardigan, simple glasses, hair pulled back in a loose bun. You remember everything? Betty asked anxiously, as Detective Rodriguez's tech specialist fitted me with a wire, a small microphone disguised as a button on my cardigan. I remember, I assured her. Your address history, your late husband's name, your children's names. I've got this. Rodriguez checked his watch. Mrs. Chen, you need to leave now. Mrs. Sullivan, plainclothes units are already in position down the street. We'll be monitoring everything. The safe word is aspirin. If you say you need aspirin, we come in immediately. Betty hugged me tightly. Please be careful. I will. Now go. After Betty left through the back door to wait at my house, I was alone in her living room. I'd positioned 3 hidden cameras, one on the bookshelf, one disguised in a picture frame, one in the kitchen facing the front door. Everything was recording. At 1:45 p.m., a dark sedan pulled up across the street. My heart hammered. But it was just the police getting into position. At 2:03 p.m., a silver Honda Civic parked in Betty's driveway. 2 men got out. The first was middle-aged, maybe 55, wearing a cheap suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He looked like he could be someone's accountant or insurance agent, utterly ordinary. The second was younger, late 20s, athletic build, expensive sneakers. He looked around the neighborhood carefully before they approached the door. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and opened it, channeling Betty's nervous demeanor. "Mrs. Chen?" The older man smiled warmly. "I'm Agent Morrison. This is my colleague, Agent Davis. May we come in?" "Yes, of course," I said, stepping aside. They entered, and Morrison immediately scanned the room with practiced eyes. Davis moved to look out the back window. These were not amateurs. "You have the funds?" Morrison asked, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. There's been a problem," I said, exactly as Rodriguez had coached me. "I could only get 12,000. The bank said—" "Mrs. Chen." Morrison's voice went ice cold instantly. "We had an agreement. 15,000. "I'm trying. But my accounts—" Davis moved closer, deliberately invading my space. "You're not trying hard enough. You have equity in this house, don't you? You have a car? Jewelry? My wedding ring?" I touched it protectively. Actually, my own ring, not Betty's. But they wouldn't know that. "Whatever it takes," Morrison said. He opened his briefcase, pulling out official-looking documents covered in official-looking seals. All fake, I was certain. "Mrs. Chen, if we don't complete this transaction today, the federal seizure order goes into effect immediately. They'll take everything. The house, your car, even your Social Security payments will be garnished." "But you said if I paid, I'd get my money back," I protested, letting my voice shake. Morrison's expression shifted to practiced sympathy. "And you will? All $250,000, plus the $15,000 you're paying today, but only if we complete this properly." Davis pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my supervisor. Maybe we can accept the $12,000 and work out a payment plan for the rest." He walked into the kitchen, ostensibly for privacy. I watched him look around carefully, at the cabinets, the counter, the refrigerator. He was casing the house, I realized, cataloging what could be stolen later. That's when everything went wrong. Davis froze, staring at the picture frame on the kitchen counter, the one with the hidden camera. Then his eyes tracked to the bookshelf, to the slightly too convenient angle of a decorative box. "Morrison," he said quietly, "we have a problem." Morrison's head snapped up. "What?" Davis walked to the bookshelf, reached out, and plucked the camera from its hiding spot. He held it up, his face twisted with rage. "You're recording us, Betty?" My blood turned to ice. "I don't know what— Bullshit!" Davis advanced on me. "You think you're clever? You think you can trap us?" Morrison was on his phone immediately. "She's wired. She has to be. Check her." Davis grabbed my arm roughly, and I jerked back. "Don't touch me!" "Where are they?" Morrison demanded, moving to the window. "Where are the cops, Betty? In that car down the street? The one that's been there since 1:30? They'd known. The whole time they'd known. I said, "Don't touch me." I yanked my arm free, backing toward the door. "I want you out of my house." "Your house?" Morrison laughed coldly. "You stupid old woman. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? We have your address, your sister's address, your grandchildren's schools." That was it. The threat to family. "I need aspirin," I said loudly, clearly. "I need aspirin right now." The front door burst open. Detective Rodriguez and 3 officers flooded in, weapons drawn. "Police! Hands up! Now!" Morrison and Davis froze. For one long moment, I thought Davis might run. His muscles tensed, his eyes darted to the back door. But he saw the officers coming through there, too. Slowly, both men raised their hands. Rodriguez moved to me immediately. "Mrs. Sullivan, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I said, though I was shaking violently. As officers cuffed the 2 scammers, Morrison looked directly at me. Not at the police, at me. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You have no idea how deep this goes." They were led away, and suddenly Betty's living room was full of police officers, crime scene technicians, evidence bags. Rodriguez was talking to me, asking questions, but I could barely hear him over the ringing in my ears. "Mrs. Sullivan? Margaret?" I looked up at him. They knew about the cameras. They knew about the police. How? Rodriguez's expression was grim. That's what we're going to find out. The next 3 days passed in a blur. I stayed with Betty at my house. Neither of us wanted to be in her home after what had happened. The police interviewed us repeatedly. The news covered the arrests. Elderly woman helps bust scam ring, which brought attention I hadn't wanted. But mostly, I slept. The adrenaline crash hit me hard, and I spent most of the weekend in bed, replaying those moments when Davis had found the camera, when Morrison had threatened my family. Had I made things worse? Were we safe? Rodriguez called Sunday evening. We need to talk. Tomorrow, my office, 10 a.m., both of you. His voice told me this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Monday morning, Betty and I sat once again in Detective Rodriguez's office, but this time, an FBI agent was with him, a sharp-eyed woman named Agent Sarah Chen. No relation, she said, with a slight smile when she saw Betty's reaction to the shared surname. Morrison and Davis are in federal custody, Rodriguez began. They've lawyered up, not talking. But we've been analyzing their phones, their finances, their connections. Agent Chen leaned forward. Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Sullivan, what you stumbled onto isn't just two con artists. It's an organized operation. Morrison and Davis were middle management, collectors who handled local pickups. The actual operation is much larger. My stomach sank. How much larger? We've identified at least 15 victims in Oregon and Washington in the past year alone. Total losses exceeding $3 million. She paused. And the people running this operation are not happy that you've disrupted their business. What does that mean? Betty asked, her voice thin. Rodriguez answered. This morning at 6 a.m., you both received emails. He turned his laptop toward us. The email was from Federal Legal Services. It was politely worded, but the message was clear. Drop all charges against Morrison and Davis, refuse to testify, and $100,000 of Betty's stolen money would be recovered and returned. Continue with prosecution, and there would be unfortunate consequences for your family. They're trying to buy your silence, Agent Chen said, and threatening you if you don't comply. I read the email again, feeling that cold calm settle over me. The same feeling I'd had when balancing impossible budgets, when finding discrepancies in financial statements, when facing down executives who'd tried to hide fraud. No, I said simply. Maggie, Betty started. No, I repeated, looking at Agent Chen. They've already taken Betty's life savings. They've threatened our grandchildren. They've terrorized my sister for months. And now they think they can buy us off with 20 cents on the dollar and vague threats? I felt my jaw tighten. Absolutely not, Agent Chen nodded approvingly. That's the answer I was hoping for. Because if you testify, you'll help us build a RICO case. We can trace this organization, find the people at the top, and take down the entire operation. But our families, Betty said. Will be protected, Rodriguez assured her. We're taking this seriously. Patrol cars will increase presence on your streets. We're flagging your grandchildren's schools. And we're setting up monitoring on all your communications. Over the next week, the scammers tried different approaches. Phone calls from victims of Morrison and Davis claiming we'd ruined innocent men's lives. A letter delivered to Betty's house offering $150,000, more than half her stolen money, if she'd just reconsider her testimony. Each attempt was more sophisticated than the last. They even tried approaching Betty's daughter, Linda, claiming to be journalists writing a story about scam victims, probing for information about our state of mind, our resolve. But Linda called us immediately. Mom, some creepy guy was asking questions about you and Aunt Maggie outside my work today. I told him to get lost and called the police. That's when I realized we needed more than just law enforcement protection. We needed our family, our community, to understand what we were fighting and why. I called a family meeting at my house that Saturday. Betty's 3 children and their families came. My 2 sons and their wives attended. 14 people crowded into my living room. I told them everything. The scam, the money, the arrest, the threats. I didn't sugarize it or make it less frightening than it was. These people are criminals, I said. They're trying to scare us into backing down. But if we do, they'll just move on to other victims, other families, other grandmothers, other... My son James, a lawyer, spoke up. What do you need from us, Mom? Awareness, vigilance. If anyone approaches you, calls you, emails you with questions about Betty or me, don't engage. Contact the police immediately. I looked around at the concerned faces of my family. And I need you to know why we're doing this. It's not about the money anymore. It's about stopping these people. Betty's oldest daughter, Sarah, came to sit beside her mother. Mom's been through hell. We're not letting anyone intimidate her, or you, Aunt Maggie, anymore. The solidarity in the room was palpable. My grandson, Marcus, a college student studying computer science, offered to help secure our email and phone systems. Linda's husband, a former Marine, started coordinating with neighbors to keep eyes on our houses. We weren't alone. That's what the scammers had counted on, isolated, frightened elderly women. But we had family. We had community. That night, another email arrived. This one was different. No bribe, no overt threat. Just a simple message. We're watching, we're patient, and we remember. I deleted it and went to bed. Let them watch. Let them remember. Because I wasn't backing down. 2 weeks before the preliminary hearing, I was working in my garden when a car pulled up to my curb. A woman in her late 30s got out, professionally dressed, carrying a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Sullivan?" she called out warmly. "I'm Jennifer Walsh. I'm a victim advocate with the Federal Crime Victim Resource Center. Do you have a few minutes?" Something felt off immediately, but I couldn't pinpoint what. I pulled off my gardening gloves slowly. "I don't recall requesting a victim advocate," I said carefully. "Oh, the FBI assigned me to your case. Given the threats you've received, they want to make sure you have proper support." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "May I come in? I have some important information to share about the upcoming proceedings." I'd been warned by Rodriguez about exactly this kind of approach, but her credentials looked legitimate, and she'd mentioned specific details about the case. "We can talk out here," I said, gesturing to my porch chairs. She hesitated, then sat, crossing her legs primly. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'll be direct. I've reviewed your case extensively, and I'm concerned. Deeply concerned." "About what?" "About your safety and your sister's well-being." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "These RICO cases, they can take years. Years of your life consumed by court appearances, depositions, testimony. And the defense attorneys, they're ruthless. They'll dig into every aspect of your and Betty's lives. Financial records, medical histories, personal relationships. We have nothing to hide," I said evenly. "Perhaps not. But Margaret, may I call you Margaret?" She didn't wait for permission. "The stress alone has been known to cause serious health issues in people your age. Heart attacks, strokes. Is putting yourself through this really worth it?" Ah, there it was. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ms. Walsh?" "There's an alternative approach, a mediation program where victims can negotiate directly with defendants. Morrison and Davis's attorney has indicated they're willing to participate. You could potentially recover a significant portion of Betty's money, maybe even all of it, without the trauma of a trial." I studied her carefully. Her suit was expensive, her manicure was fresh, and her eyes, despite the concerned expression, were calculating. "How much are they paying you?" I asked bluntly. Her mask slipped for just a second. "Excuse me?" "Morrison and Davis, or whoever sent you. How much are they paying you to come here and try to talk me out of testifying?" She stood abruptly, the pretense of sympathy vanishing. "You're making a serious mistake, Margaret. These people you're going after, they have resources you can't imagine. Connections in places you'd never expect. If you continue down this path—" "I'll see justice done," I interrupted. "Now get off my property." Her expression hardened completely now, all pretense gone. "You think you're brave? You're just a stubborn old woman who doesn't understand the game she's playing? Morrison and Davis? They're nobody. The people behind them, the ones you're really threatening with your testimony? They don't forget. They don't forgive." "Good," I said, standing to match her posture despite my trembling hands. "Because neither do I." She stared at me for a long moment, then laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "You know what's going to happen. You'll spend years in court. The defense will delay, appeal, drag this out until you're too old or too sick to testify. And in the end, you won't recover Betty's money. You won't see anyone punished. You'll have accomplished nothing except making enemies of very dangerous people." "Are you finished?" Her jaw clenched. "You were offered an easy out. Multiple times. You chose the hard way." She walked back to her car, then turned back. "When this all falls apart, and it will, remember that you brought it on yourself." She drove away, and I stood on my porch, shaking. Not just my hands now, but my whole body. I went inside and called Rodriguez immediately. "A woman named Jennifer Walsh just left my house claiming to be a victim advocate," I said. "She tried to convince me to enter mediation with Morrison and Davis. We don't have anyone named Jennifer Walsh working victim advocacy on this case," Rodriguez said grimly. "I'm sending a unit to your house now. And, Margaret, you did exactly right by not letting her inside." After the police left, having taken my statement and promising to investigate Walsh's identity, I sat alone in my living room. The fear that had been manageable before felt heavier now. These people were persistent, creative, connected. Betty came over that evening after I called her. "Maybe they're right," she said quietly. "Maybe we should consider some kind of settlement. Get you some of your money back and move on with our lives." "It's not about the money anymore, Betty." "Then what is it about?" I thought about Jennifer Walsh's cold eyes, about Morrison's threat that first day. This isn't over. About every elderly person these criminals had targeted, every life they'd devastated. "It's about making sure they can't do this again," I said firmly. Betty was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay. Then we see it through." That night, I lay awake, replaying Walsh's words. "When this all falls apart, and it will, remember that you brought it on yourself." Fear whispered that she might be right, that I was just one woman fighting an organization with resources and reach I couldn't comprehend. But then I remembered Betty's broken expression that first day, the tremor in her hands as she'd admitted losing everything. No, fear wouldn't win. If they wanted me to back down, they'd have to do better than veiled threats and fake advocates. I was seeing this through to the end. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late September. Agent Chen had prepared me extensively. This wasn't the full trial, just a proceeding to determine if there was enough evidence to move forward with the RICO case. "Morrison and Davis's attorney will try to discredit your testimony," she'd warned. "He'll paint you as confused, mistake-prone, a grieving widow who misunderstood legitimate business transactions." "Let him try," I'd said. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Morrison and Davis sat at the defense table with their attorney, a sharp-featured man named Richard Brennan, who wore an expensive suit and an expression of practiced boredom. Betty sat in the gallery behind me. My sons were there too, James looking every inch the lawyer in his own right, and Michael with his arms crossed protectively. I took the stand and was sworn in. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Park, led me through my testimony methodically. The phone calls Betty had received, the threats, the manipulation, the in-person meeting at Betty's house, Morrison and Davis's own words about federal seizures and payment plans. And during this meeting, Park asked, did the defendants threaten you or your family? Yes. Morrison specifically mentioned knowing my grandchildren's schools. I kept my voice steady, factual. I was testifying as I used to present audit findings, with cold precision and unshakable confidence in the numbers. Then it was Brennan's turn for cross-examination. Mrs. Sullivan, he began smoothly, you're 68 years old, correct? Yes. And you've never worked in law enforcement or investigations? I was a corporate accountant for 40 years. He smiled thinly. So no formal training in identifying criminal activity. Yet you took it upon yourself to impersonate your sister and orchestrate a sting operation. I took it upon myself to protect my sister from criminals who'd stolen her life savings. Alleged criminals, Mrs. Sullivan. That's for the court to determine. He moved closer. Now, these phone calls your sister received, you didn't witness them, did you? You're testifying to hearsay. I heard some of the later calls myself. I have recordings. His expression flickered with annoyance. Yes, recordings you made without the caller's knowledge or consent. Oregon is a one-party consent state for recording, I said calmly. I checked before I recorded anything. Brennan's jaw tightened slightly. How convenient. Tell me, Mrs. Sullivan, isn't it true that you harbored resentment toward your sister for years? That there's been family tension? Objection, Park stood. Relevance? Your Honor, I'm establishing the witness's potential bias and motivation to fabricate. Overruled, but get to your point quickly, Mr. Brennan. Brennan turned back to me. Mrs. Sullivan, you and your sister have had disagreements over the years, haven't you? We're sisters. Of course we've disagreed. Financial disagreements specifically, about the distribution of your mother's estate when she passed in 2018? I felt a flash of anger. They'd dug into our family history trying to find leverage. Our mother's estate was distributed evenly and fairly. This has nothing to do with... I'm suggesting, Brennan interrupted, that you saw an opportunity in your sister's alleged victimization, a chance to position yourself as the hero, the savior, while painting her as incompetent and mentally diminished. That's absurd, I said, my voice sharp now. Is it? You testified that your sister gave away $250,000 to strangers over the phone. That requires either exceptional gullibility or cognitive decline. Which is it, Mrs. Sullivan? Is your sister incompetent, or are you lying? That's when Morrison made his mistake. He leaned over to whisper something to Davis, but the courtroom was quiet enough that his words carried, "Told you we should have handled the sister first." The courtroom went still. Judge Hamilton looked up sharply. Mr. Morrison, did you just threaten a witness? Morrison's face went white as he realized what he'd said. No, Your Honor, I was just... Bailiff, note that statement for the record, the judge said coldly. Brennan looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Your Honor, my client misspoke. Your client just confirmed the witness's testimony about threats to her family. Judge Hamilton turned to Morrison and Davis. Gentlemen, do you understand you're not helping your case? Davis, who'd been calm until now, suddenly stood up. This is bullshit. We didn't do anything that half of corporate America doesn't do every day. We were just better at it. Mr. Davis, sit down, Brennan hissed urgently. No, you want to talk about fraud, talk about banks, talk about insurance companies. We just cut out the middleman. Davis was spiraling now, his composure completely shattered. And these old ladies, they're not innocent victims. They're marks who were stupid enough to fall for it? Mr. Davis, Brennan grabbed his client's arm. But Morrison was standing now, too, pointing at me. You think you've won? You think this is over? There are 20 more people doing exactly what we did, and they're smarter than us. You haven't stopped anything. Judge Hamilton banged her gavel. Bailiff, restrain the defendants. Mr. Brennan, control your clients, or I'll hold you in contempt along with them. As bailiffs moved to physically sit Morrison and Davis back down, I caught Morrison's eye. He was breathing hard, his carefully constructed mask of respectability completely destroyed. I smiled at him, calm, cold, victorious. "You're finished," I said quietly. His expression crumpled into impotent rage, but he had nothing left to say. Judge Hamilton addressed the courtroom with barely controlled fury. "I've seen enough. There's more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Bond is revoked. Defendants will be held in federal custody pending trial." She looked at Morrison and Davis with undisguised contempt. "And gentlemen, you should know that your outburst today will be entered into evidence. You've done the prosecution's job for them." As they were led away in handcuffs, Morrison looked back at me one more time. But this time, there was no threat in his eyes, only the dawning realization that he'd lost. The trial itself was almost anticlimactic after Morrison and Davis's spectacular courtroom meltdown. Their outburst had given prosecutors exactly what they needed. Agent Chen called me the day after the preliminary hearing, barely containing her excitement. "Margaret, you won't believe what we found. Davis's rant about 20 more people gave us cause to dig deeper into their operations infrastructure. We've identified the entire network." Over the next 3 months, the case expanded beyond anything I'd imagined. The FBI arrested 17 additional people across 4 states. They seized bank accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, and found records of over 800 victims totaling more than $12 million in theft. Morrison and Davis, faced with overwhelming evidence, including their own recorded admissions in court, took plea deals. Morrison got 15 years in federal prison. Davis got 12. But that wasn't enough for me. "What about the people at the top?" I asked Agent Chen during one of our regular updates. Morrison said there were others, people smarter than them. "We're building cases," she assured me. "But these things take time." "Then I have time." I became what one prosecutor jokingly called their star witness emeritus. Every trial, every hearing, every deposition for the expanded RICO case, I was there. Betty testified too, when needed, but I became the face of the victims, the grandmother who'd fought back and won. The media attention was intense. I was interviewed by local news, then national news, then featured in a documentary about elder fraud. I used every platform to warn others, to share what I'd learned about scam tactics, to encourage people to report and fight back. But the moment I'd been waiting for came in March, nearly 6 months after Morrison and Davis's arrest. The actual trial of the organization's leadership, 3 men who'd been running the operation from offices in Seattle, disguised as a legitimate debt recovery consulting firm. Their attorney tried the same tactics Brennan had used, portraying me as confused, bitter, seeking attention. But this time, I had a mountain of evidence and 6 months of testimony experience behind me. Mrs. Sullivan, the defense attorney, a woman named Patricia Vance, asked during cross-examination, "Isn't it true that you've become something of a celebrity from this case? Book deals? Speaking engagements?" "I've been offered book deals," I said calmly. "I've turned them all down. Any speaking engagements I've done have been unpaid, for senior centers and community groups, to educate people about scams." "But you've enjoyed the attention, haven't you? The feeling of importance." I looked directly at the jury. "What I've enjoyed is watching criminals get held accountable. What I've enjoyed is receiving letters from other fraud victims who found the courage to report because they saw that justice was possible. What I've enjoyed is knowing that my sister might eventually recover at least some of what was stolen from her." That last part was key. The prosecution had been working with a victims' restitution fund, piecing together money seized from the scam operation. It wouldn't be everything, but it would be something. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The 3 ringleaders, Michael Pearson, David Song, and Jennifer Walsh, yes, the same woman who'd shown up at my house, received sentences of 22, 20, and 18 years, respectively. In the courtroom, as the sentences were read, Walsh turned to look at me. Her expression was pure hatred, but beneath it, I saw something else. Defeat. I held her gaze steadily until she looked away. After the sentencing, Agent Chen found me in the hallway where Betty and I were fielding questions from reporters. "Margaret, Betty, there's someone who wants to meet you." She led us to a conference room where a woman in her 70s sat waiting. Her name was Dorothy Richardson, and she'd lost $180,000 to the same operation. "I saw you on the news," Dorothy said, tears in her eyes. "I'd given up. I thought I was alone, that I'd just been stupid and deserved what happened. But you fought back. You made them pay." She gripped my hands. "Because of you, I filed a police report. Because of you, I'm going to get some of my money back through the restitution fund." Over the next hour, 3 more victims came to that conference room. Each one had a similar story: devastation, shame, hopelessness, then seeing me testify on the news and finding the courage to come forward. By the end of that day, Agent Chen had 7 new victim statements that would strengthen ongoing cases against affiliated scammers in other states. Betty and I drove home in silence. Finally, she spoke. "You did it, Maggie. You actually did it." "We did it," I corrected. 2 weeks later, a check arrived in the mail. The first restitution payment, $47,000 toward Betty's stolen funds. More would come as additional assets were liquidated. It wasn't everything. It would never be everything. But it was justice. And that was worth more than money. A year after the final sentencing, Betty and I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, glasses of wine in hand. "You know what I did today?" Betty asked, a small smile on her face. "What?" "I booked a cruise to Alaska. Something I always wanted to do with Harold, but we never could afford." She looked at her wine glass. "I'm using the restitution money, not to rebuild my retirement exactly as it was, but to actually live a little." The final restitution total had reached $168,000, not the full $250,000, but enough to restore Betty's security and dignity. She'd paid off the loan against her house, rebuilt a modest retirement fund, and decided to spend some on experiences she'd deferred for too long. "I'm proud of you," I said. "I'm proud of us," she corrected, echoing my words from a year ago. My own life had changed in unexpected ways. The publicity from the case had led to invitations to speak at law enforcement conferences about elder fraud. I'd become a volunteer consultant for the FBI's Elder Justice Initiative, reviewing scam tactics and helping train agents. More importantly, the experience had reconnected me with my family in deeper ways. My granddaughter Emma had been so inspired by what Betty and I had done that she'd changed her college major to criminal justice. "Because of you, Grandma," she'd said. "I want to help people fight back too." Our family gatherings were bigger now, more frequent. The shared experience of supporting Betty and me through the trial had reminded everyone what mattered most. Meanwhile, Morrison, Davis, and their cohorts were discovering that federal prison was nothing like the comfortable lives they'd built on stolen money. I'd kept track through Agent Chen, who occasionally shared updates. Morrison had been transferred 3 times after attempting to run phone scams from inside prison, targeting other inmates' families. He was currently in solitary confinement, privileges revoked. Davis had lost an appeal and had his sentence extended by 3 years after it was discovered he'd hidden additional assets offshore. Jennifer Walsh, the cold, calculating woman who'd threatened me on my own porch, had fared worst of all. Her attorney credentials had been fraudulent, and additional charges of identity theft and practicing law without a license had been added to her sentence. She'd been attacked twice by other inmates who'd learned she'd scammed elderly people. Last Agent Chen had heard, Walsh was in protective custody, isolated and paranoid. The 3 ringleaders were in different facilities, unable to communicate, their network completely dismantled. Federal seizure had taken everything: homes, cars, bank accounts, investments. Their families had disowned them. Song's wife had divorced him and testified against him for a reduced sentence on her own involvement. Pearson's children had legally changed their surnames to distance themselves from their father's crimes. Do you ever feel bad for them? Betty asked, reading my thoughts. I considered the question honestly. No. They built careers on devastating people's lives. Morrison told me himself he had a list of grandchildren's schools. These weren't desperate people making one bad choice. They were predators who enjoyed the hunt. I feel bad for their families, Betty said. The innocent ones. I do too, I admitted. But their families are also their victims. They're better off free of people like that. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from orange to pink to purple. My phone buzzed. A text from Agent Chen. FYI, Pearson's appeal denied this morning. All sentences upheld. It's really over, Margaret. I showed Betty the message. It's over, she repeated softly. Then she raised her wine glass. To new beginnings. I clinked my glass against hers. To new beginnings. The next morning, I woke up and realized I felt genuinely happy for the first time in over a year. The weight of constant vigilance, court dates, testimony preparation, it was finally gone. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and found an email from a victims advocacy group in California asking if I'd be willing to speak at their annual conference. I typed out my acceptance. Betty called around noon. Maggie, I'm looking at cruise ship cabins. Want to come with me to Alaska? I thought about my calendar, my volunteer commitments, my quiet routine. Then I thought about life being too short, about Betty's devastated face that first day she'd told me about the scam, about how close we'd come to losing everything, including each other. Book a cabin for two, I said. When do we leave? Her delighted laugh was answer enough. That evening, I received a letter. It was from Dorothy Richardson, the first victim who'd come to meet me after the final sentencing. She was writing to tell me she'd started a local support group for fraud victims, helping people navigate reporting and recovery. You showed us we don't have to be ashamed, she wrote. You showed us we can fight back. Thank you for giving us our power back. I put the letter on my refrigerator, next to Emma's acceptance letter to the Criminal Justice Program at University of Oregon. These were the real victories. Not just the courtroom wins, but the ripples spreading outward. Lives being rebuilt. People finding courage. Families reconnecting. The scammers were in prison, their operation destroyed, their lives ruined by their own choices. And us? We were free, we were together, and we were living. That was the best revenge of all. So that's my story. From the moment Betty's shaking voice told me she'd lost everything, to watching those criminals led away in handcuffs, to reclaiming our lives and freedom. But here's my question for you. What would you do? If someone you loved was being victimized, would you fight back? Would you risk your safety to seek justice? I hope you never have to make that choice. But if you do, remember this. You're stronger than you think. And you don't have to face it alone. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Have you or someone you know dealt with scammers? Subscribe to hear more stories of ordinary people who refused to be victims, who stood up and fought back. Thank you for listening to my story. Stay safe out there, and remember, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. This is Margaret Sullivan, reminding you that it's never too late to stand up for what's right.